Lena Astor. Listen, you will attend Mrs. Russell's ball.
Really?
Don't you dare sound cheerful.
I am curious about that house.
Really? You are glad to be ordered to march into hell and to dance with the devil?
We are all fascinated by the outstanding destinies of people who made 19th century New York live through its Gilded Age epoch. The Vanderbilts, the Astors, the Huntingtons and other old Knickerbocker aristocrats and new money tycoons shaped the look and feel of the city. In this video, we will look at the traces they left on the architectural map of the town. So, welcome to the journey through the opulent and historic mansions of Gilded Age New York.
I'm pleased with the size, big enough to be splendid without being oppressively so.
I agree. One needs to be able to breathe.
Obviously and luckily, there are many historically significant places that survive till our day as silent witnesses of the Gilded Age. In this video, we will focus on the key, most important and famous places, which became even more legendary thanks to the light shed on them by the new Gilded Age series by HBO. So let's begin with the outrageous, outspoken, impossibly lavish and unbearably extravagant Fifth Avenue mansion, which in the 1880s belonged to the power couple of William Kissam and Alva Vanderbilt.
Is it that woman again?
You must be pleased they're moving in and we have peace at last.
I don't know which is worse. The noise of the builders or the chance of running into her in the street.
I have a whole video dedicated to their personalities and life stories. You can find it on my channel in the Gilded Age playlist or podcast. So for now, let's step into their palatial home and see what made it so outspoken among the old, self-proclaimed aristocracy of the city.
What surroundings, Mrs. Russell. We could be at Tsarskoye Selo.
Ah, yes. Catherine the Great would feel quite at home here.
In so many ways.
The grand medieval castle-like house was built by the most sought-after architect of the epoch, the famous Richard Morris Hunt, who designed the Grand Hall of the Met and the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty. An important note: in the Gilded Age series, they explicitly say that the architect of the house is another renowned master, Stanford White. Moreover, the mansion itself doesn't resemble a bit the one that actually belonged to Alva in her first marriage to William K. Vanderbilt. For some reason, they decided to feature the house of William's brother, Frederick, built in 1905 by Stanford White in Hyde Park, New York. Perhaps they would like to introduce the character of this architect for the next seasons, since he had a really intriguing life path himself. Back to the Vanderbilts mansion, the Fifth Avenue was a say-no-more street at the epoch. The surrounding area was once part of the common lands of the city of New York, which was allocated all the waste, vacant, unpatented and unappropriated lands. Even in the late 19th century, it was still a new development for the city, and this way a perfect playground for the so-called nouveau riche, or new money. In other words, if you wanted to build something really grand and impressive and were looking into the future, there wasn't a better place for that.
This is quite an achievement.
This is the age of achievement, Mr. Russell. An age when anything is possible.
I like that. And I will remember it.
So that's where in 1882 the family of the younger Vanderbilt erected their cozy castle, which occupied the entire block between 51st and 52nd Streets on the west side of Fifth Avenue, right across the Triple Palace, which belonged to the elder Vanderbilts, William's parents in other words. Interestingly, William's elder brother, Cornelius Vanderbilt II, also built his family nest in the neighborhood, so in the 1880s and 1890s the 10 blocks of Fifth Avenue south of Central Park were known as Vanderbilt Row. While the Triple Palace is a 19th century revival of some neoclassical forms with perhaps an injection of some Venetian influence, the younger Vanderbilts preferred the more romanticized concept of the castle architecture. Their home was soon nicknamed the Petit Château, or the Small Castle. It had 3.5 stories, and what's more important for a highly ambitious new money family of the epoch, a 1,750 square foot banquet hall or ballroom, which served Alva Vanderbilt perfectly in her audacious and quite successful attempt in conquering the city elite.
That was nice of you.
I've already said, if necessary, we can quarrel with her later.
Just like the fairy tale exterior, the rich interior of the mansion reflected Alva's strong taste for living like a long-gone French royalty. Indeed, it is known that Alva worked in tight collaboration with the architect to make sure all the details reflect her tastes and project the unparalleled ambitions of becoming the new reigning queen of the town. Well, the majority of the exquisite furnishing was brought from France, and this splendid secretary and commode from the late 18th century has previously belonged to Marie Antoinette herself. You can now view it in the Met.
Careful, that table belonged to King Ludwig of Bavaria.
He had it once, I've got it now.
Alas, the destiny of this brilliant architectural marvel is rather sad. Alva and William's family collapsed, and in 1926 the building was sold to a real estate developer who had more lucrative plans for this piece of land. So in 1927 the Petit Château was pitilessly demolished. Currently the site is occupied by a 41-story office building. And what about the house of the Astors, or better to say, the Mrs. Astor, Alva's key opponent for the crown of the Queen of the New York City Hill? Oh, this old money heiress had something to boast about too.
We cannot succeed in this town without Mrs. Astor's approval, I know that much.
So we are to bow down before a woman who has less money than me and less of absolutely everything than you.
Caroline Astor, the Mrs. Astor, had lived most of her adult life in a brownstone mansion on the corner of the 34th Street and 5th Avenue. The Astors owned the 2 lots that covered the block along the avenue, sharing it with William Waldorf Astor, the son of her husband's brother. Doesn't look even a fraction as fancy as the Vanderbilts mansion, huh? And still, it was here, at this understated 5-story box, where she for years hosted her annual ball in January for the so-called 400 as the queen of the New York society. I have a particularly detailed video about the nitty-gritty of the gatekeeping duties of the elite society, where I tell the story of the rise and fall of Caroline Astor, Mr. Ward McAllister and Mamie Fish. Don't forget to check it out, I'll leave all the links in the description. This brown building is nevertheless a tell-all witness of the personal turmoils of the Astors. So how this little, dull-looking house turned into the world-famous Waldorf Astoria Hotel? This incredible story will be told in one of my future videos, so I welcome you to subscribe now, not to miss it coming.
You mean you don't think that I can beat Mrs. Russell at my own game?
My dear Mystic Rose, I fear if you try, it might be at the cost of your own dignity.
Alas, the legendary brownstone building didn't live through the centuries, and today its place is occupied by the Empire State Building. However, even more famous was the Newport mansion of Mrs. Astor, which luckily survived to our days in an almost intact state. Beechwood, as they called it, was Lena Astor's grand summer cottage in the fashionable Newport, Rhode Island. It was built in the mid-19th century in the eclectic style with somewhat Neapolitan motifs. The Marina villa was purchased by Lena's husband in 1880 and reportedly cost them a hefty sum of about $190,000, which would be approximately $5.8 million in today's value. The same Richard Morris Hunt, who was in charge of the Vanderbilts' Fifth Avenue Chateau, was working on the renovation of this exquisite Newport mansion of the Astors in 1881. The thing is that upon purchasing this house, Mrs. Astor commissioned the addition of a ballroom that would fit 400 guests. Now, the rumor has it that's why the list of the elite members of New York society was limited to this number, 400.
Why does everyone have to go to Newport now? What's wrong with Saratoga Springs? It was very fashionable when I was a bride.
Exactly.
Like Alva Vanderbilt, Mrs. Astor was also inspired by the French fashion trends. Well, I guess everyone was, since the Gilded Age epoch corresponded in time with the Belle Époque in Paris. She couldn't secure a piece from Marie Antoinette's belongings, but arranged delivery of furniture and even the finest wallpaper directly from the French capital.
You need 4 outfits a day at the minimum, decent jewels, and a full dance card.
I see.
After Lena Astor died in 1908, the fabulous house was passed on to her son, Jack. However, his ownership didn't last for long, since he sadly died on the Titanic 4 years later. Since then, the mansion switched numerous private hands until one of its new owners, Paul Madden, came up with an extravagant idea. In the 1980s, he turned the villa into a sort of theatrical playground. He refurbished the interiors, hired 20 costumed actors, and reopened the house to the public so that those who would come for a visit would immerse into the imaginative Victorian household of the Astors, as if it was 1891. The tour featured actors playing the daily lives of those who inhabited, ran, and cared for the estate. During its time as a tourist attraction in the 20th century, the estate was even marketed as Astor's Beechwood Mansion. Amazing, right? Paul Madden went even further and introduced 2 different immersive shows depending on the time of the year. During summer months, actors played roles of the Astor family, as if they were really living in the house and giving tours to the guests. And during the off-season months, they played servants of the Astors. Visitors were now treated as though they were applicants for summer jobs on Mrs. Astor's staff, and they applied for any job they wanted. The staff positions included gardener, footman, butler, chef, housemaid, and many others. Madden even once recreated the 400 ball and held many events, inviting American statesmen and British royalty and aristocrats of the highest caliber. Unfortunately, or fortunately, who knows, these shenanigans are also a history long gone. Now the estate belongs to Larry Ellison, the co-founder of Oracle. He has big plans to return the former glory to the mansion and the adjacent properties, bringing them back to the estate designed by Richard Morris Hunt.
I gather Mrs. Astor has finished Beechwood.
That was a good buy. She didn't have to tear it down. Just add a wing and tidy it a little.
In the Gilded Age series, the Beechwood exterior was played by the 1852 Château-sur-Mer, which at the time belonged to the Wetmore family. By the way, many of the series' interiors were also filmed there and other surviving Newport mansions of the epoch. Another Gilded Age pearl of the series is the opulent New York palace of the outcast Mrs. Chamberlain, with its amazing collection of the finest art of the epoch.
Did you inherit a collection, or did Mr. Chamberlain?
Oh no, we're what your aunt would call new people.
The real-life prototype of this enigmatic character is the notorious Arabella Huntington. I told her story in the standalone video. A person of refined taste, she heavily invested in the decorations of her first house on 4 West 54th Street, a small fraction of which has survived to our day. Obviously, this reserved brownstone exterior wasn't enough for a power couple in 19th century New York. Soon after the official marriage, they built a new mansion on the southeast corner of 5th Avenue and 57th Street, and Bella sold the old house to John D. Rockefeller. Curiously, he was soon to become one of the wealthiest men in America, yet he was perfectly happy with the understated looks of his new city residence. Together with his wife, they hated the ostentatious lavishness of 5th Avenue, so they preferred to lead a rather simple, relatively simple living. It is known that Rockefellers didn't refurbish the house, just added some new carpets, and they also got along with only a few, 10 servants, and the mistress of the mansion, Laura Spellman Rockefeller, was acting as her own housekeeper, and her daughters, the young heiresses, were sharing a maid, something that would cause a shock to Lena Astor or Alva Vanderbilt.
But if I don't maintain standards, what is the point of me?
Of course. But what we need to determine now is whether Mrs. Russell will support those standards or undermine them.
The Rockefellers lived in that house up until the death of Laura in 1915. Her grieving husband left it to never return again. Soon during the war years, he opened the mansion to the Red Cross workers. Yet all in all, the remarkable house survived intact until his death in 1937, becoming a sort of time capsule of 1970s aesthetic movement decor. Alas, his heir, John D. Rockefeller Jr., decided to demolish the building and only saved a small fraction of its artistic interiors. That's how the master bedroom and dressing room made it to the Museum of the City of New York, and the Moorish smoking room to the Brooklyn Museum. The site of the old mansion became the sculpture garden of the Museum of Modern Art. And that was the second major residence of Arabella Huntington on 5th Avenue that became the prototype of her Mrs. Chamberlain alter ego in the Gilded Age series by HBO. In 1889, her husband purchased 6 adjoining lots on the southeast corner of 5th Avenue and 57th Street to build a large residence in which they could house their large art collection. Their plans were so ambitious that the best architects declined the commission one by one. Collis Huntington first approached George B. Post, who designed the across-the-street palazzo of the elder Vanderbilts. Declined. Arabella wanted the fashionable Richard Morris Hunt. Declined. Did it have something to do with the couple's doubtful reputation? In any case, there were few things that money couldn't buy in the Gilded Age, so upon the second approach, George Post accepted the generous commission. But just like shown in the series, this grand mansion almost never welcomed society gatherings. Despite the effort, the right location and size of a building weren't enough to get them into society.
Oh no, it mustn't look as if we're on a planned shopping trip.
I don't...
No, I mean it. But I always enjoy our meetings. Miss Brooke?
I'm not sure whether that was rumors or it was true to reality, yet people harshly critiqued the outcome of this huge construction. Some said the floor plan was awkward, the interiors tasteless, and others even proclaimed it a wayward railroad station. Anyways, Arabella kept the mansion until her death in 1924. By that time, that part of New York was quickly turning into a large commercial center with old mansions giving place for huge multi-story buildings. The same happened to Huntington's 5th Avenue property, which was demolished, and its place is now occupied by today's Tiffany & Co. As you've already guessed, none of these historic mansions actually took part in filming the Gilded Age series. Most of them were lost forever, others are inaccessible. However, there were certain scenes in the series that were actually filmed in the real, still existing house of the epoch.
I'll say nothing unless he's looking for a fight. But if he isn't, I'll give him one.
Perhaps, but right now, could you put down your sword and have some coffee?
I learned about it while I was working on my research for a video about the black elite featured in the Gilded Age. Danae Benton, the actress who played the up-and-coming journalist and writer Peggy Scott, revealed in one of her interviews that the scenes in the Scott family home were indeed taken inside of a house from 1883 in Troy, in upstate New York. Really, this location from River Street all the way to Washington Park, with its collection of houses from 1830s, 40s and 50s, is a great way to plunge yourself into this epoch when on a walk or a tourist visit to the city. There is enough here to create a world, as the series production director said. Other New York State mansions whose interiors were featured in the show are located in the Hudson River Valley. For example, the Glenview Mansion in Yonkers served as the interior of Mrs. Astor's home in the show. Today it can be toured as part of the Hudson River Museum.
They're good looking and they smell of money, the sweetest scent I know. If I were you, I'd bring him in now and gain the credit.
Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. I hope you enjoyed this video and it has become a nice addition to my other videos about the Gilded Age epoch, brought back into light by the eponymous series. Remember, the best is yet to come, so stay tuned and see you in my other videos. Bye bye!